Today I'd like to explain some of the modifications I do to the machetes I use here in Brazil. Typically here in Brazil I use a Tramontina, 16-inch Tramontina machete, which I have modified to my own, the way I use a machete. This here is a 12-inch Ontario. I like the Ontario for North America because it is a short, heavy machete. It's easily packable and it bites really deep in green wood. Machetes are poor cutters on hardwood, and you want a heavy machete for cutting harder wood. So this is the one I use when I'm back in Pennsylvania. Now there are 4 edges which I like to put on a machete. You can take a machete and give it a complete convex grind if that's what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that. It's your machete. I work a little bit differently with a machete. Basically I only put a convex grind on it for about the first top half of the blade. The sweet spot on the machete is up here in the front. That's where you're going to get all of your chopping power from. The base of the blade basically doesn't take any impacts at all, and I like to have a very, very sharp edge along the base of the blade for slicing and working as a draw knife. I'll explain those techniques here in a minute. On the spine of the machete, I normally take it and I'll file the entire thing flat all the way across, but I'll leave the first section here squared off, and then the front end I'll leave rounded for smashing. You can see this is all chewed up from doing various things with it, but I'll demonstrate these techniques here in a minute. The base of the blade here, I have a very, very sharp Scandi edge. In fact, the machete is extremely sharp all the way along this entire edge. If your machete isn't that sharp when you're heading into the bush, you have no chance of getting it that sharp again once you're in the bush. Sharpening in the field, I just use a file. The back of my machete sheath, this is a sheath which I made myself. I carry a small mill file in the back, and usually machete sharp is sharp enough for field work, but I like to have my machete very sharp when I head off into the bush. That way it's easier to touch up and gives me different edges I can work with. I leave the back end of the machete squared off here because that gives a nice square right angle edge, which is actually quite sharp, and I use it basically as a planer for making tinder when I want to make a fire. Basically the way that works is you hold the knife, hold the machete perpendicular to the material you're going to scrape, and the top end of the blade is rounded off so it doesn't tear up your hand. You can actually bear down on that quite a bit and it's not going to rip you up. You just basically have to run the blade along the material like that until you produce a large handful of wood shavings. And these, the wood shavings burn very well. They'll take a spark if you use dry wood. Until you have a large handful of tinder, which we're going to light on fire here in a minute. You get the idea for that. Now the Scandi edge down here at the bottom you can use for making shavings, you can use for slicing. When you're walking in the bush and you get vines hanging up on your leg, you don't want to chop down near your leg. What you do is you turn the blade around, just give them a cut with the very sharp base of your blade. But basically you can do the same thing. You can make thicker shavings with the Scandi edge. Works very good for making shavings, splits. All these are good for making fire. So basically, just to sum it up, there's 4 edges on every one of my machetes. Would be a super sharp Scandi edge down here at the bottom, which is used for slicing. You can use it as a draw knife by holding the machete like this and pulling towards you. You can make shavings pushing with that edge. There's a convex edge up here in the front from about halfway on this blade, about halfway up to the edge. The convex edge bites very deep in wood, resists sticking in wood. It's a very robust edge as well that resists rolling or chipping. On the back of the blade I have a squared off spine for about the first half of the blade, which as you see makes shavings, and then the front of the blade is rounded off, which is more comfortable for holding with your hand, or you can also use it for smashing things on the ground. It's great for opening dry coconuts and that sort of thing. So basically I've got 4 edges to work with in the bush, and I find that's sufficient for me. Machete is a jack of all trades tool, and if you set it up right, it actually is actually more useful. There's one other small edge that I do on the Ontario here at the base of the blade. It's a rough stamping when it comes from the factory, and I like to file that flat as well, and I use that for striking my fire steel. We'll light some of this on fire and see if we can get our bamboo shavings to work. There they go, they're burning. So basically you have 5 useful edges. You've got this sharp Scandi edge, the more robust, deeper cutting convex edge, the shaving edge here on the back for making scrapings, and the smashing round edge, which is comfortable to hold or smash with, plus a nice flat spot up in the front for making working with your fire steel. Some of the other things I do with the Ontario is I grind off the corners of the handle. They come from the factory, they're very sharp, and they transmit a lot of force right to your hand there, especially when you're hitting on hard wood. And I like to take off the back corner here where it sets against your palm, because the Ontario, as it comes from the factory, has a very sharp point right there. And after a few dozen impacts on the palm of your hand with that sharp point, you start to really resent the fact they didn't grind that off the factory. So there you have it. This is the machete I like to use in North America. The simple 12-inch Ontario, they cost about $20, and then I've got it set up with the sheath with my sharpening system right there in the back for sharpening in the field.